Hi, I'm Marc Bayerkohler. I'm a trainer at the PCI Council. I was a QSA for many years, and I've been part of many PCI assessments. And I'm here to talk to you about the huge impact that ISA training can have in your organizations. So, for many of us, PCI can feel like a yearly fire drill. The QSA shows up, and now it's a scramble. We're having meetings every day. We're trying to pull together evidence. Everybody's stressed out. And then maybe there are some non-compliant findings. So now, in addition to the regular assessment, we're trying to fix problems. We're trying to build technical solutions, maybe roll out some patches or a new scanning solution. And we're trying to do all of that at the same time that we finish the regular assessment. We have time for retesting, all before our report deadline. It's expensive, and it's disruptive, and sometimes it can feel like compliance is something that's being done to you instead of with you. But it doesn't have to be this way. What if PCI DSS wasn't just once a year? What if PCI knowledge lived inside of your business, inside your own teams, instead of being driven by those outside consultants? What if PCI wasn't a scramble, but it was baked into our everyday operations? Well, that's what happens when you invest in your people with ISA training. So let's stop for a minute and let's think, what is an ISA? Let's picture an ISA. Who is that person? What are they doing? Is it an auditor? Maybe it's the person that's managing the assessment. They're the ones meeting with the QSA. They're helping gather the evidence. Or maybe it's someone that's actually filling out those compliance forms. Well, that's all correct, and that's been their traditional role, and it's an important role. But if that's all you think ISAs are for, then you might be missing out on a real opportunity. ISAs are indispensable for preparing for an assessment because they can gather evidence year-round so that when the QSA does show up, it's all ready to go. Policies and procedures handed over on the first call. Diagrams and flowcharts already updated. Logs are pulled, interviews already arranged. ISAs act as compliance champions, helping their colleagues to understand and implement controls for the different requirements. They're part of the project teams, shifting compliance left into the design stage. And of course, ISAs are subject matter experts on PCI and PCI DSS. And they can provide answers and resources internally without having to wait on a QSA. They know what's coming with PCI. They know they're up to date with the news, and they can help us prepare for changes like version 4. And with their knowledge of scoping, they can help scope environments more accurately, or better yet, maybe even eliminate some systems from scope, avoiding wasted effort. And ISAs can be positioned throughout an organization, making PCI part of business as usual. Because we all know security isn't a once-and-done activity. It's what our frontline people are consistently doing. And an ISA's familiarity with the requirements means they can incorporate security into their day-to-day activities. But maybe one of the most powerful roles of an ISA is being a translator. Because think about it, QSAs, they could see over a dozen organizations every year. Do they really remember your business, your custom systems, your corporate language? Do they know which systems were retired or which new systems were brought online last year? Well, your ISAs do. And the ISAs can translate the QSA speak into language that your organization understands. And they can translate it back so that that QSA understands the unique context of your business. That's a big deal. Have you ever been in one of those meetings where you're listening to people talk and they say something like, well, we can't just throw the TPS reports into the data lake because the Kafka won't authenticate to our S3 buckets. And you wonder, who even understands all of this? Well, our ISAs do, because they know these systems. And they can explain, here's what this system does, and here's how it maps to the PCI requirements. And when those QSAs rotate out, as QSAs sometimes do, the ISAs provide a continuity in our business, carrying that institutional knowledge of PCI on year to year. And that makes a huge difference. They know the history of the controls that were implemented and why. And they know that, yeah, we've got this legacy mainframe and it connects unencrypted to the database, but we've got a compensating control for that, and here's the documentation. And let's just say maybe that new QSA comes in and they have a different opinion about that compensating control. I know I would want an ISA advocating for my company, explaining, yes, here's the guidance and the requirement and the FAQs we relied on. Here's how we tested this to show that we meet the requirement, and explaining all of this to the QSA in language that they understand. The results? Faster assessments, because the evidence was already prepped and you're going to have fewer surprises. Cheaper assessments, using less QSA time and fewer delays. Smarter compliance, because that PCI knowledge was applied at the design stage, catching issues earlier and saving rework later. When you empower ISAs, you save time and money, and PCI becomes less painful and more effective. So let me show you what this looks like in real life. WestJet is a Canadian airline with over 20 payment channels and over 40 different teams. And they faced a challenge getting ready for PCI DSS version 4. And I can see why, because airlines and universities are some of the most challenging environments for PCI. They often have to integrate and support entities that they have little control over. And so yes, payments at WestJet are complex. They've just got so many different channels. You can pay online or in airports or even in flight. And they're doing this across different service providers and different infrastructures. And sure, some of their systems might be simple, like a point-to-point encrypted point-of-sale system, but others can get pretty messy, especially when you're dealing with third-party service providers at airports who don't even think they're in scope for PCI. All of this complexity can create bottlenecks, and WestJet knew that they needed a baseline of PCI knowledge throughout their organization in order to get through this. So, instead of putting all of this burden onto their GRC team, they trained over 30 ISAs across the business. Not 2, not 3, but 30. They pulled these people in from all over, different roles. They had architects, developers, project managers, payment teams, and of course GRC. And not all of them had experience with compliance or security or even technology. And not all of them sat the final exam to get certified as an ISA. But every one of them came away from that class with a deep PCI awareness. And because of this, PCI was no longer siloed in compliance. It became embedded across the business. And here's what happened. The benefits were immediate. With these bottlenecks removed, projects were no longer stalled waiting for input from the compliance team. these silos broke down, and so the teams were seeing PCI from new perspectives. And because of this, they started noticing compliance issues in their own areas. They had PCI in mind from the start instead of trying to bolt it on at the end. And so they were pointing out how compliance could affect new systems, heading off future conflicts. And they were all speaking the same language from that shared base of knowledge. So that PCI went from being a blocker to an enabler. One of WestJet's company values is work together to win. And that's exactly what happened during the ISA training. Because WestJet opted for the PCI Council's corporate training option, where they hosted a trainer privately in their organization just for them. And this is fantastic for getting a team building effect. And they invited people from all over the company, and they all spent 2 days together, in class together, with the same material, doing exercises together, eating together. And all this really built a sense of camaraderie and shared understanding. And people started to realize together just how broad the PCI scope was and how they could tackle it as a team. This is so great for me to see in a class when people are in front of me actually building solutions and answers, because for the first time we have in one room the right people asking the right questions and the right people with the answers. And because of this, PCI wasn't just compliance anymore. It became part of the culture. Today, those 30 ISAs are champions in their own departments. They're planning for assessments, preparing evidence, and coordinating with auditors. They're educating their colleagues. They're shifting that compliance left, catching issues early during design. They're saving money, saving time, and making PCI sustainable. That's the power of champions. And you can have these same benefits in your organization. But to do it, you have to give your staff the tools to succeed. Without training, PCI responsibility often falls on people who don't have the needed understanding. And that can lead to fatigue and stress. Like so often, students come up to me and say, I just inherited this PCI, and I'm trying to get my arms around it. I'm just trying to understand what I need to do. And then after class, they just feel so great about finally receiving the knowledge that's going to help them be successful. After ISA training, students are more competent and more confident in their PCI responsibilities. And they should be, because they're literally getting the same class as the QSAs. It's the same topics, the same materials, the same exercises. The main difference between a QSA class and an ISA class are just the questions that the students ask. During class, once a manager told me, he said, "Of course, I'm sending my staff to ISA training. Why wouldn't I arm my people with the same knowledge that the external assessors get?" Now, format-wise, there are a lot of different options for our courses. For the ISA courses, they always start with an online portion with a computer-based training, followed by an instructor-led training in a virtual classroom, kind of a Zoom. Or they can continue on with e-learning, where they do the computer-based training at their own pace. Or there's the option for physically coming together in a classroom with an instructor for face-to-face training. And they're all great, and they fit for different uses. But the face-to-face training is my favorite. And it's because the interaction you get, the engagement you get is just unmatched when we can come together in a classroom and just focus on one topic together. Another advantage is that with the different students, we'll often meet other people from different industries. All sorts of people, from pen testers to project managers, all interested in PCI. And I'll even say it as an instructor. Sometimes the most powerful lesson doesn't actually come from the instructor, but it comes from one of the other students that's faced similar problems and come out the other side with a solution. And the students love these classes. I'll tell you this, after you initially certify as an ISA, year after year, you can recertify online, completely online if you like. You don't have to come back to a face-to-face class. And yet, year after year, I see familiar faces in my classes. And it's because the students have chosen to come back to these classes. Sometimes it's because they just want a refresher on PCI DSS. Lately, a lot of students have come because they want to know about the updates and changes with PCI DSS. But regardless of the reason, they're always just so appreciative of getting the information that's going to help them at work. So, how can you get started with this? Well, okay, I've got a QR code here. This is a link to the training and qualification overview page on the council's website. I'll say, you probably don't need this QR code. If you just go to my webpage, on the top banner, there's an item there for training, and you just click on that, and it'll take you to the information, how to sign up, the schedule, prices, everything you need to know. But as long as we're talking about that, I want to point out we have information about all of our other classes as well. Because the PCI Council, we have classes about P2PE, PIN security, secure software. And not everybody knows this, but these classes are open to anyone. They're great for implementers, developers, or anyone who's interested. We call this is the knowledge training option. And it allows anyone to take classes side by side with the assessors to know more about all of these topics. We've also got the Credly badge up here. That is something that the ISAs are eligible to use to show off their new certification. And as an ISA, they get some extra letters after their name, and even some CPEs. Not only that, I'll point out the PCI Council, we can build custom courses for your organization, for your interests and needs. I was just in North Carolina not long ago, working with the ATM department of a very large bank. And they were interested in PCIP, but they also wanted to know a bit about P2PE and PIN as well. So we created a custom course for them. And it was just so great, because at some point, we actually had students running around the room, exchanging key components, and simulating live ATM transactions as part of the course, just learning about security and having a blast. So, to bring it all home, PCI DSS, it doesn't have to be a fire drill. With ISA training, you get PCI embedded in your teams, in your processes, and in your culture. It's faster, cheaper, smarter. So we are, as WestJet might say, working together to win. Thank you.